Morning. A cold glass-walled office in Denver. The air inside the boardroom is suffocating, heavy with the scent of corporate panic. Marcus Hale, 42, stands before a mahogany table. He is the operations coordinator, a 9-year veteran. A massive shipment has been misrouted. Millions of dollars in losses. Shareholders are screaming for a name. The manager snaps, "Someone has to be accountable." Marcus starts to explain, but is cut off. "The report has your name on it." The director nods. "Effective today, you are terminated." Marcus stays silent. He nods. He leaves. But the truth was just beginning to wake up. Stand by. Now. Believe. Marcus Hale was a man of steel, silence, and absolute rhythmic routine. At 42, his face was a map of quiet focus and the deep, enduring weariness of a man who worked two lives, one to keep the world's cargo moving and one to keep a small home safe. He had been with Highland Logistics for nearly a decade. In an industry that worshipped the 90-hour work week and late-night posturing, Marcus was an outlier. He arrived at his desk exactly at 8 a.m., executed his tasks with surgical precision, and vanished the moment the clock hit 5. He understood the language of flow, the way a single delayed crate could ripple through a supply chain like a fever. To the younger, more aggressive VPs, Marcus was a mystery, or worse, a ghost. They saw a man in simple, ironed, button-down shirts who didn't attend the Friday night happy hours or care about the cutthroat office gossip. They assumed he lacked ambition because he never fought for the corner office or the spotlight. They didn't see the man who spent his evenings building cardboard rocket ships or helping with complex long division. They didn't see the man who had learned that the most important deliverable of the day wasn't a shipping manifest, but a hug at the front door. He carried a small, worn photo of his late wife, Sarah, in his wallet, a constant reminder that the most valuable things in life aren't found in a ledger. Marcus was a single father. 5 years ago, his world had been surgically hollowed out when Sarah passed away after a brave but exhausting battle with illness. Since that day, he had systematically dismantled his old, high-pressure life. He had once been a rising star in international trade, a man who lived in airports and boardrooms, but he walked away from the travel and the promotions. He needed to be the father who was at the school gate at 3:30 p.m. He needed to be the person Lily saw when she woke up and when she went to sleep. He traded the prestige of the corporate ladder for the presence of a home. He was the anchor, and the anchor doesn't move just because the tide gets rough. The Denver office was a pressure cooker of ambition, but Marcus never let the heat reach his desk. He managed the mountain corridor distribution, a complex web of routes where one wrong turn could delay 1,000 packages. He was the fixer. When a truck broke down in a blizzard or a terminal hit a bottleneck, Marcus was the calm voice on the radio that found the solution. But his calmness was often mistaken for weakness. Because he didn't shout, because he didn't play the political game, he was viewed as replaceable. He was the concrete in the foundation, unseen, unthanked, but entirely essential. Lately, the company had implemented a new automated routing layer. It was supposed to be the future, an AI-driven system that decided which cargo went where. Marcus had warned them twice that the logic gates were unstable during high-volume spikes. He had sent detailed memos, complete with timestamped logs, that were filed away and forgotten by directors who were too busy calculating their end-of-year bonuses. They didn't want to hear about logic glitches. They wanted to hear about disruption. They wanted the speed, but they were ignoring the safety protocols that Marcus had spent 10 years perfecting. When the disaster finally happened, a fleet of medical supplies destined for Chicago ended up in a cold warehouse in Phoenix. The board needed a head on a platter. The automated system had logged Marcus's ID as the final verifier. It didn't matter that he hadn't manually touched the routing. It didn't matter that he had been in a parent-teacher conference when the error occurred. The system had his name, and in a company built on glass and steel, names were the only currency that mattered when things broke. The boardroom meeting was short, clinical, cowardly. The director, a man named Quang Due, who had never stepped foot in a warehouse, looked at Marcus with a look of pure, performative disappointment. Dewey needed a head to show the investors to protect his own bonus. Marcus was the head with the least amount of protection. No political allies, No social media influence. Just a man with a record of quiet service. "You're terminated, Marcus," Dewey said, not looking him in the eye, his voice carrying the cold finality of a closing door. "The integrity of our operations is paramount. We cannot have errors of this magnitude on our watch. Security is waiting to escort you out." Marcus stood there, feeling the weight of the silence. He thought of Lily. He thought of his mortgage. He thought of the 9 years he had given to this building. He could have fought. He could have brought up the memos. He could have shouted about the system errors. But he saw the faces around the table. They weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for an exit. He realized then that Highland Logistics wasn't a community. It was just a machine. And he was a part that had just been discarded for the convenience of the operator. He didn't say a word. He simply nodded, turned, and walked out of the glass tower, leaving his 9-year legacy behind in a small cardboard box. In a real-world system, the person who is most expendable is often the one who does the most essential work. Corporate logic values visibility over integrity. When the crash happens, the system doesn't look for the root cause. It looks for the person who didn't spend enough time building a shield of noise. The walk out of the building was the longest distance Marcus had ever traveled. The Denver sun was bright, reflecting off the glass skyscrapers. But to Marcus, the city felt cold and indifferent. He walked to his 10-year-old truck, the sound of his heavy work boots on the pavement sounding like a drumbeat of failure. He sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He looked at the high-rise he had just been exiled from and felt a hollow ache in his chest. He wasn't angry for himself. He was terrified for Lily. He pulled into his driveway at 2:30 p.m. The house was quiet, the air smelling of pine and the faint scent of Sarah's favorite lavender candles. Usually he would be finishing his reports or coordinating a late afternoon pickup. He walked inside, the familiar scent of vanilla and old books greeting him. He saw Lily's drawings pinned to the refrigerator, pictures of mountains and stars with captions like, "Dad is the king of trucks." He felt a sharp, bitter lump in his throat. How was he supposed to tell a 9-year-old that the world her father worked so hard for had just pushed him away? He sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills, realizing that his health insurance would vanish at the end of the month. Lily came running through the front door at 3:45 p.m., her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She stopped dead when she saw him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee. Her bright eyes scanned his face, detecting the microscopic shift in his energy that no one in the boardroom had noticed. "Dad," she asked, her voice small and intuitive, "why are you home already? Is it a holiday? Are we going to the park?" Marcus forced a smile, a masterpiece of a protective lie. "No, pal, just a different kind of day. The company decided I deserved a little extra time off. I thought maybe we could actually finish that model bridge we started last weekend, the one with the suspension cables." Lily didn't move. She walked over and stood beside him, her small hand resting on his shoulder. "You're making your sad thinking face, Dad. Did the big office people be mean to you again? Did they forget how hard you work?" Marcus pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair. "I'm just tired, Lily, that's all. I'm just tired." But as the night wore on, the reality of his situation began to press down on him like a physical weight. He sat at his laptop long after Lily went to sleep, not looking at resumes, but at his bank statements. He had enough in savings for 3 months, maybe 4, if they were careful. He calculated the cost of health insurance, the mortgage, the electricity. He looked at the grocery list Lily had started: blueberries, milk, the good cereal. Every item felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. He thought about the medicine Sarah had needed and the mountain of debt he had only just finished climbing. He was back at the base of the mountain, and the air was getting thin. He thought about the injustice of it all. He thought about Kwang Dui, sitting in his heated leather chair, already planning the press release about the personnel restructuring that had solved the shipment issue. He thought about the engineers who had ignored his warnings. For a single dark moment, Marcus felt the urge to go back to the office and scream. He wanted to force them to see the man they had destroyed for the sake of a spreadsheet. He wanted them to see the face of the accountability they so casually demanded. But Marcus was an adult who understood the frequency of power. Shouting at a wall doesn't make it fall, it only makes your throat sore. He realized that his dignity was the only thing he had left that they hadn't taken. If he became the angry ex-employee, he was playing into their narrative. He was the disgruntled worker they could dismiss as unstable. If he stayed quiet, he remained a ghost, and ghosts have a way of haunting the people who tried to bury them. He decided he wouldn't beg, he wouldn't plea, he would just be Marcus. He spent the next 3 days in a state of managed survival. He woke up at the same time. He made the same breakfast. He helped Lily with her homework with the same patient focus. But in the quiet moments, when Lily was at school and the house was empty, he walked through the rooms, looking at the life he had built. He realized that Highland Logistics hadn't just taken a job, they had taken his sense of safety. They had reminded him that in the corporate world, you are only as valuable as your last mistake, even if it wasn't your mistake to begin with. He felt like he was waiting for a storm to end, unaware that the lightning was currently hitting the very building that had cast him out. True strength isn't found in a loud protest. It's found in the quiet decision to keep the pancakes turning and the math homework finished when your world is falling apart. Silence is often the most powerful form of resilience. Inside the headquarters of Highland Logistics, the air was anything but peaceful. The misrouted shipment had been corrected at a staggering cost. But the investors weren't satisfied. They wanted a full systems audit. They wanted to know why the automated routing layer had failed so spectacularly after being touted as unbreakable. The board was looking for a technical explanation, not just a human sacrifice. A young systems analyst named Tyler, who had only been with the company for 6 months, was assigned to the forensic data review. Tyler hadn't been in the room when Marcus was fired. He didn't know Marcus Hale as anything more than a user ID on a log. But Tyler knew code, and he knew that code doesn't make mistakes. It follows instructions. He spent 36 hours fueled by energy drinks and a nagging feeling that the data was hiding a secret. For 18 hours straight, Tyler lived in the digital shadows. He tracked the packet flow of the Chicago shipment from the moment it entered the system to the moment it was authorized for the Phoenix warehouse. He saw the logic gates, he saw the spikes in volume, and then he saw the ghost loop, a synchronization lag that happened at exactly the same time every day. "Wait a minute," Tyler whispered to the empty server room, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the monitors. He zoomed in on the timestamp of the final verification, 11:14 a.m. on Tuesday. He cross-referenced it with the security logs of the office terminals. Marcus Hale's terminal had been inactive since 10:45 a.m. His badge had been logged out of the building. He was literally at a school recital when the verification happened. The authorization hadn't come from Marcus's hand. It had been an automated system override triggered by a failure in the Smart Sync protocol, the very protocol Marcus had warned them about in his memos 3 weeks prior. The system had hit a logic stall. When it couldn't find a manual override because the coordinator was away, it defaulted to the last active user ID in the queue to maintain the processing rhythm. That ID was Marcus Hale. The system hadn't been verified by Marcus. It had simply used his name as a digital stamp to cover its own malfunction. It was a digital frame-up. Tyler felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that an innocent man had been fired for a glitch in a machine he had tried to fix. He also realized that Marcus's memos, the ones Dewey had dismissed, contained the exact hex codes needed to prevent this from ever happening again. Highland Logistics hadn't just fired an employee, they had fired the only person who knew how to save them from themselves. They had cut their own safety line. The report moved up the chain with the speed of a brush fire. It went from the tech lead to the operations director, and finally to the CEO, Victoria Sterling. Victoria was 36, a woman of data and absolute integrity who had been traveling in Europe when Marcus was terminated. When she returned and read the audit, she didn't call for a PR meeting. She called for Quang Dewey. Her voice on the internal line was as sharp as a razor. The confrontation in the CEO's office was short. Victoria threw the forensic report onto her desk. "You fired him in 30 minutes, Dewey," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You didn't check the terminal logs. You didn't review his warnings. You just wanted a sacrifice for the board to protect your own quarterly bonus. You used a man's reputation as a bandage for your own incompetence. Dewey stammered, his face a mosaic of red and white. The system had his name, Victoria. Accountability is the rule here. I had to act fast to protect our reputation with the shareholders. I thought I was doing the right thing. You didn't protect our reputation, Victoria snapped, standing up. You proved that we are a company that doesn't understand its own technology. And more importantly, you proved that we don't value our people. Marcus Hale didn't route those trucks. The system did. And it did it because we ignored the very man who told us it was broken. We didn't just lose a shipment, Dewey. We lost our soul. Victoria looked at Marcus's personnel file. She saw the exceeds expectations ratings for 9 consecutive years. She saw the mention of his daughter and his status as a widower. She realized then the true cost of Marcus's silence. He hadn't fought back not because he was guilty, but because he was a professional who expected the system to be as honest as he was. He was waiting for the logs to tell the truth. Fix this, Victoria commanded. And when I say fix it, I mean bring him back. Not as a coordinator, as the director of systems integrity, and find out where he is. I'm going to make the call myself. I want Dewey's resignation on my desk before Marcus walks through the door. The truth is like a slow-moving river. You can try to dam it up with lies, but eventually the weight of the water will break the barrier. Accuracy doesn't care about your job title. It only cares about the math. The boardroom of Highland Logistics was silent. This time, it wasn't the silence of panic, but the silence of a collective, heavy realization. The final audit was projected on the massive screens, glowing with a clinical, undeniable truth. The conclusion was written in bold: system-level logic failure. Zero evidence of human negligence by user ID, M. Hale. Previous warnings ignored by management. Kwang Dewey sat at the far end of the table, his eyes fixed on a spot on the carpet. No one was looking at him. No one was offering a good try or a we all made a mistake. He was a man who had traded his character for a quick fix, and now he was the one who was truly invisible. The directors, the same men who had nodded in approval when Marcus was escorted out, were now staring at the data as if they were seeing a ghost. They realized that their signatures were on the memos that dismissed Marcus's warnings. They were all part of the ghost loop. We let him go too fast, a senior manager whispered, the words echoing in the high-ceiling room. We didn't even give him a chance to defend himself. We treated him like a line item on a budget. Victoria Sterling stood at the head of the table. She didn't look at the screens. She looked at her team. We didn't just let him go, she corrected them, her voice resonant and firm. We threw him away. We used a man's life as a bandage for our own arrogance. We didn't listen to his warnings, and then we blamed him for the disaster he tried to prevent. This isn't a technical failure, gentlemen. It's a moral one. We are the ones who need to be held accountable. The freeze moment hit the room like a cold front. It was the moment they realized that their multi-billion-dollar infrastructure was entirely dependent on the trust of the people running it. And they had just proven that trust was a lie. They realized that if the news of this reached the other operations staff, the loyalty of the company would evaporate overnight. They weren't just looking at a misrouted shipment. They were looking at the collapse of their culture. Victoria took a slow, deliberate breath. Marcus Hale is currently at home. He has a 9-year-old daughter. He spent the last 4 days wondering how he was going to feed her because of a decision we made in 30 minutes. We are going to apologize, and we are going to do it publicly. I want the shareholders to know that we failed him, not the other way around. A few directors shifted uncomfortably. Public apologies were bad for the stock price. They suggested a private settlement, a check to make him go away quietly. They suggested a non-disclosure agreement. They were still trying to manage the optics instead of the integrity. No, Victoria said, her eyes flashing with a sharp moral clarity that silenced the room. Justice that is hidden isn't justice. It's a transaction. We are going to restore his reputation in front of every employee in this company. If we aren't brave enough to admit our mistakes, we don't deserve to lead. Now get him on the line and tell Dewey to leave the building. The silence that followed was absolute. No one defended Dewey. No one justified the haste. They just waited, listening to the rhythmic, electronic chirping of a phone ringing in a small house in the suburbs. The experts were finally quiet, and for the first time in years, the company was ready to listen to the man they had silenced. The biggest mistake an organization can make isn't making an error, it's making a decision when they don't have enough data to be fair. Decisiveness without a conscience is just a weapon. The phone rang on Marcus's kitchen table. He looked at the caller ID, Victoria Sterling, CEO. He didn't pick up immediately. He looked at Lily, who was currently coloring a picture of a house with a very sturdy foundation and a giant smiling dad. "Dad, is that the office people? Are they calling to say sorry?" she asked, her voice full of a child's unwavering belief in justice. Marcus nodded. He picked up the phone. "Hale speaking." The conversation was long. Victoria didn't lead with a legal offer or a generic, "We made a mistake." She led with a sincere, heavy apology. She told him about Tyler's audit. She told him about the ghost loop and the discovery of his ignored memos. And then she offered him the position of Director of Systems Integrity. "We want you back, Marcus," Victoria said, her voice sounding tired but sincere. "Not just for your skills, but for your integrity. We need someone who isn't afraid to say stop when everyone else is shouting, 'Go!' We need the anchor." Marcus was silent for a long time. He looked out the window at the Denver mountains. He thought about the 3 months of savings and the grilled cheese life. He thought about the men who had mocked his clothes and his silence. "Are you going back, Dad?" Lily whispered, her eyes bright with a 9-year-old's intuition. Marcus looked at his daughter. He realized that if he went back to the same place, doing the same thing, he was teaching her that respect is something you buy back with a salary. He needed to set a new standard. "Only if things are different, Victoria," Marcus said into the phone. "I'm not a coordinate on a spreadsheet anymore. I pick Lily up at 3:30. I don't work for people who fire based on a report they haven't read. If you want a director, I want a community that values the floor as much as the ceiling." "Deal," Victoria said. "Your terms are the new company policy. Enter." Marcus didn't return to Highland Logistics as a savior or a hero. He returned as a partner. He established the Hale protocols, a system of triple verification that ensured no automated glitch could ever frame a human again. He made it a policy that any terminating action required a mandatory 48-hour investigation period. He turned the ghost loop into a safety net. The story of the single dad who was fired ended not with a paycheck, but with a transformation. Marcus Hale was still a man of steel and silence. But now when he walked through the glass lobby, people didn't just see a ghost. They saw the foundation. They saw a man who had stood his ground when the world tried to move it. True justice. It isn't about fixing a mistake. It's about having the courage to understand it in the first place. Marcus was home, and for the first time in 9 years, the system was actually true. He sat at his new desk, looked at Lily's drawing pinned to the wall, and realized that the most important cargo he had ever managed was his own integrity. Trust is like a bridge. It takes years to build, but only a second to break. A man's value isn't found in his job title. It's found in the fact that he knows exactly what he's worth. Even when the world forgets, a hasty decision can change a life, but the truth always leaves a footprint. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They are usually the ones holding the whole system together. Real justice isn't about being right. It's about being fair before you act. If you believe that fairness should always come before decisions, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments, would you have the courage to go back to a place that treated you like a scapegoat?